So today we're talking about hiring vendors for your wedding.
Hey, that's us.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but there are literally so many other people that go into making a great wedding vendor team, such as photographers, florists, DJs.
Okay, but wait. Who do you hire first?
Yeah, is there like one vendor more important than the other, or a priority, or?
Look, let's just see what our guest has to say about it today.
If you're planning a wedding and want all the secret tips for a smoother wedding day experience, then stick around as we interview some of the top professionals in the wedding industry. We are Coastline Studios, a fun-loving team of filmmakers who specialize in creating custom wedding films alongside some extremely talented people. Welcome to Let's Talk Weddings. Today, we're continuing from our last episode with Alicia from A Day in May, who is dropping some great tips on how to get your wedding planning started on the right foot. Check it out. Well, we're back with Alicia and Day in May events, and for part two, right? And we're recapping from last time where we talked about a couple of pillars for planning a wedding. What were those for?
We did, yeah. The big question is, okay, you're engaged, now what, right?
Yeah.
What happens after you have been proposed to and you're starting that long walk towards the aisle? So we kind of said our big four things to start with are working on your guest list, finding a venue, or narrowing that down, choosing within that the date or date range that you're looking for, and then starting to build what we call a working budget or your investment commitment.
All right, so once you have those four pillars down, I'm assuming the next part is picking your vendors for all the rest of the things that go on through the day.
Yeah.
How do you go about that? Where do you even start?
That's a great question, Josh. Well, I'd like to say that you hire your planner first.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. But no, in all seriousness, I do think if you're looking at hiring a wedding planner, whether that's someone who's going to be with you from the inception of your engagement to after your I-dos, or somebody who is maybe more entering a more of a limited or partial planning relationship, starting to investigate those resources to find which type of planner really best marries with your style. Your planner is the one who's going to help you kind of balance those four pillars, right? And they're always going to be changing. They're going to be shifting a little bit as new information is presented to you, but also as you and your partner make the decisions that best align with your overall vision for your wedding. So as we think about the next steps of who to hire next beyond your planner, assuming that your venue is already booked and you're working with that location, or maybe that location is your yard or your parents' home and you're making plans there, we tend to recommend to our clients to look at those one-of-a-kind vendors. You know, well, what is a one-of-a-kind vendor, Alicia? You know, what do you mean by that? Here I'm asking questions to myself. We tend to look at those who maybe are more artisans or irreplaceable vendors. So in the case of Coastline Studios, you as a videographer and your talents and your cinematographers are independent and like-minded. And so if I really want to work with Coastline Studios and I know that that's someone who I want to hire, same with maybe a photographer who is an artist into that right as well, once they're booked, they might be booked. So if you have your date, your location, you know kind of what your working budget is, reach out to them. Because again, once those vendors are booked, you can't get them back. So that's what we kind of mean by a one-of-a-kind vendor. With these one-of-a-kind vendors, if you know you want to work with a particular individual, it also might behoove you to reach out to another similar vendor. Now, you'll often hear us say in weddings, right, and I can say together in our company that not all vendors are created equal. It's very difficult to find somebody who is an apples to apples comparison. So let's use a band for a minute. Let's kind of unpack what I mean by that situation. Maybe you're looking at a reception band and one of them is a 6-piece and one of them is an 8-piece band. Maybe they have different vocal combinations or different musical combinations. And also, perhaps that 6-person band maybe will play for 4 hours, but your 8-person band will play for 3. So as you're starting to review their contracts or their proposals, and you also are deciding what you like or do not like based upon this vendor interaction, try to look at those black and white factors that you can start to itemize and create a good cost comparison if you're making a decision based upon your budget with you and your partner. So you inherently might find that through your vendor contracting process that you and your partner also need to have a conversation on what's most important to the both of you too.
So when it comes to working with the budget and the vendors, do you feel like you should be sharing your budget with your vendors to get their help and their ideas on things?
You know, I find that honesty is always the best policy, Josh. It's kind of a two-part question. Yes, I do think you should share your budget because that's very quickly going to establish a rapport with your vendor. And as we all know, establishing a rapport with your core team is really important to creating a seamless event on the end, which is why we're all in this business, is to make it a perfect day for our couples. On the other side of that coin, though, it also creates a platform for the vendor to help create a brand ambassador for them, even if they're not the right fit. And either turn a contract, which is what the vendor and the couple want to have happen, or they can make a meaningful connection with them, build that rapport, perhaps create a lasting impression for them to be referred to, but then send them on their way to somebody else who might be a better fit.
And obviously, the more knowledge for the couple they can gain, the better off for them.
Absolutely. We want our couples to be advocates for themselves. Oftentimes, they forget that they're the ones in the driver's seat. You know, all of us are here and lucky to be doing what we do and what we love because they're getting married and celebrating their love. It's like, I use this expression a lot with our clients, and maybe not for you guys so much because you don't have as long hair, but for us ladies who have longer hair, when you see your stylist parting your hair on the wrong side and starting to give you this great blowout after you've had a wonderful cut, you're kind of cringing inside and you're like, oh, I should tell them this is not how I part my hair. Well, you're absolutely right. You should say something because the stylist who's doing that work wants you to feel beautiful when you leave their chair. And contrary to popular belief, your wedding planner doesn't have ESP. Neither do your vendors. So the more you can share with them and be kind and conversational, by you letting them in, they are going to let you in, and it's going to be a great relationship.
Talk to me about proximity. Like, do you only hire vendors from within a certain area from where you're from, or what do you find in your industry?
That's a great question, John. So at Day in May Events, we are a destination planning company. So we have offices in Michigan and Florida, but we service a clientele that's nationwide or international. There are some vendors that I do find that over the years that we've established great rapport with and relationships with, and we bring them along with us because they align with our expectations, they align with our clients' expectations, but that doesn't mean that they're just a guarantee too as well. I find that when we are working at a true destination location where maybe the couple has a home in one spot, or maybe they've been traveling there for years and they're bringing everybody else to them, there are some intrinsic, unique people that speak to the livelihood in the region and the culture of the area that they're in. So we do try to pull in local hotspots, if you will, or fun elements that add that great twist to a day. Maybe it's the best hot dog vendor if you're in Chicago, right? Who doesn't love hot dogs?
Right.
Or maybe it's a wonderful bluegrass band if we're in Tennessee, you know, that might speak to the story. Or if you're in Florida, it could be doing an amazing flower class, but we're using palm fronds and we're doing some sort of an accessory or something that the bridesmaids and bride can wear that day. So I do think it's important to look local, but it also says a lot about our industry because our colleagues and our contemporaries are only limited by where they can take a plane to often. It does make more sense to hire locally when we're talking about perhaps those with larger service needs like a caterer. Sometimes it is more difficult for perhaps you to bring a catering team from New York if you are located and having an event in Idaho, let's say.
Right, yeah.
But maybe you have an amazing floral designer that you want to work with and who's headquartered out of California. They can ship their product and bring their team if you're having a small event, in Figure 8 Island too. So I think when we talk a little bit about finding the right vendor match, proximity isn't as much of a factor as it used to be. Okay. The world's gotten a lot smaller, especially with shipping and airplanes. But that also goes back to one of our pillars, if you recall. We talked about budget. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes you are going to be paying a premium to bring those vendors in.
Travel costs.
Travel cost. You also have additional per diems that they need to make up for. Perhaps you're having to house them. So in addition to their flights, you also have now the needs that maybe they would, if it was a florist.
Right.
We now need a place to build a floral studio for them for the time that they're with you. So think about those ancillary costs to really look at that decision 360 degrees and ask yourself, does this support my decision? And if so, what are the things that are needed to support the vendors while they're there? Or does this vendor actually take away maybe some of my resources? And I use that expression because it is a give and take. Mm-hmm. Your budget is a little bit like moving the beads on an abacus and where you want to allocate those. So before you sign on that dotted line, really look 360 degrees at what that decision is that you're making too. And does it make sense to bring in someone?
Sometimes it might, sometimes maybe not.
Precisely.
It's those 4 pillars, like you said.
You got it. Or it might be someone who's our one-of-a-kind vendor. Remember that you have this die-hard band that you saw at a wedding in New York and you have to have them? Well, you know up front that you're already going to be making the investment to fly them there, to keep them there, and then to ship them back when you're done.
So how important is it that your personal taste for your wedding matches your vendor's style?
That's a great question. And I'm gonna answer that it is very important in some cases, and in others it's not as important. So let's talk about why it is really important. You are gonna be spending a lot of time with these people. Maybe not necessarily on the day of. There are some vendors that as a couple, you might not necessarily even really interact with much on the day of your wedding, but the lead up time to that, you're gonna be spending a lot of time with them. So let's talk about that band as we were mentioning earlier. As you're picking your song selections and you really want to have a wonderful romantic, almost Mediterranean feel to your dinner hour, if your vendor can understand and jive with you and actually get the sense and understand you and your style, then it's going to make their performance more enhanced for you and your family and your guest on that day, because they are going to hold a value and they're going to want to make that day as special as you can and do what you're asking for them to do. Now, that doesn't mean that that band has to actually love to play bossa nova style music, but they actually, by aligning with your taste, they want to serve you and meet your expectations so they can actually better align themselves with you. Let's talk about the case of maybe it's a floral designer, and you love lush bouquets and big exploding chubby flowers. I would recommend then that it's really important that your florist also marries that same type of vision. And so when you're looking at their portfolio, whether it's on social media or their website, if you're seeing more of a Japanese style of ikebana design, where it's more linear and really structural and architectural, that might not necessarily align with your overall desire for a chubby rose, really garden, dripping floral ceremony. So I think there is a lot of importance that you can share with your own personal taste, wants, and wishes with your vendor. And oftentimes, out of a wonderful collaboration, new things can be upheld. So I'm not saying that vendor who does incredible ikebana can't do lush, beautiful, over-the-top garden, but it's about how clearly you can communicate that as a couple.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how budget and location can affect your vendor choices. Does the guest count, the other pillar, go into that?
It really does. When you think a little bit about the number of vendors that are going to be directly affected by how many people you have at your wedding, it's actually quite staggering. About 70 to 80% of your overall budget is affected by your guest count. So if you think about it from a big ticket item such as your catering, if you're at a venue where it's $200 a plate, if you have 200 people versus 100 people, that's a sizable percentage of your budget.
Yeah.
Same thing with all of your tables and chairs and rentals and decor and floral. If you have 100 more people, that's 10 or 8 more tables and all of the stuff that goes into those. Same thing with invitations and your paper goods. Those are sent per household, and then per person come the day of the event. Whereas items like those one-of-a-kind vendors, like we talked about, our photographer, videographer, our entertainment, those are less dependent upon your guest count. They, like yourselves, if we have a 300-person wedding, John, you're gonna say, hey, Lish, we should probably have 2 other cameras to cover everything really well, so that way the client gets a very comprehensive video at the end of it. That's different than saying, I have 200 to 300 people and your pricing is going to change dramatically. So it's important to be aware that these elements are very much dynamic together, the elements being the pillars that we discussed, our guest count, our date, location, and our budget. Our budget's always working, and our couples are making decisions based upon what they value most. Keeping your partner's best interest in mind, being open and honest is really important, but then also not being too hard on yourself to change your mind. And there will be some things, and that same token to my planner friends out there, we don't want to have our couples second guessing their decisions. So I always say, when you make a decision, rest soundly in it and then move forward, because you're gonna have a lot of other decisions to make.
That's great advice. So we've talked a lot about the roadmap and the black and white of how to make good decisions, but how do you add color to that?
Well, that's the couple's story, right? I mean, that's the cherry on top and the sprinkles on the sundae, which is the stuff that as wedding planners and designers dream of. So we often recommend to our clients to start with the things that you love or the things that they do not prefer. And maybe that is a shared love of a favorite restaurant that you had your first date on, or it could be the backdrop for where your actual wedding is going to be. If it is a destination that has special meaning or a point of nostalgia, share that with your family. I think that a question that has evolved more recently, maybe over the last 10 or so years, isn't necessarily what are your colors, if we all remember that question, but it's what is your expression for your wedding? And more importantly, weaving in those little nuggets. Maybe it's your favorite movie quote that you and your fiance like to share together, and maybe that becomes your hashtag or a cocktail napkin. Personality and personalization is limitless. You don't have to have an endless budget or unlimited resources to make it personal. There are great DIY tricks of the trade that you can incorporate. There are wonderful resources online that are free, like having a wonderful wedding website that you can share the personality and maybe your love story and even talk a little bit about your wedding party online too. There are so many opportunities to create a touch point and a memory and invite your guest into your love story that you shouldn't feel that you have to incorporate all of them, but you should incorporate the right ones.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. I'm so glad that you could be with us for this second session.
Thank you, gentlemen.
If people want to find you, can you remind us again of the best way to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Our website is adayinmayevents.com, and on our contact page, our phone number is also there along with our email, and we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today on Let's Talk Weddings. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next episode.